So when students come to Kellogg, there's lots of different experiences that we want them to have and lots of different skills that they want them to develop. The ones that you and I are most involved with are their academic skills that they develop, their intellectual and thinking skills that they develop in the classroom. So why don't you talk a little bit about what our objectives are, specifically when we teach the core strategy class, about what it is we want the students to take away from the class.
I think that fundamentally we approach strategy the way that we approach most courses here at Kellogg. At a high level, we want students to leave being better thinkers about business problems than they were when they got here. For strategy, ultimately, that is a question of being a better thinker about how firms earn long-term profits. We teach strategy first within the curriculum here at Kellogg, and we attempt to have it be a framing mechanism where students can then try and tackle more difficult problems they're going to get later in their time here at Kellogg.
So I think that's interesting because, on the one hand, we have a really specific idea about what we mean by thinking better, but in some ways it's a really general skill. And so what I think is fun about teaching the course is that we're really conscientious and specific about thinking what we can do with students that really are going to develop those skills over time. This really starts from day one in the class. We start off on day one in the class telling them exactly what you said, that the question that the course is going to primarily address is how should firms make long-run profits. And I oftentimes make the joke the first day of class, well, that's really simple. You raise revenues and you cut costs, and now we're done, right? And of course, the whole point that we want to make on that first day and throughout the class is that it's really much harder to do than just raising revenues and cutting costs. And in some ways, that obscures all the issues that are really difficult about thinking through how to make good strategy choices. So one of the things that makes strategy really hard is that every decision that a manager makes has trade-offs. So a manager's job would be really easy if they had one lever that was labeled revenues and another lever that was labeled costs, and all they had to do was push the revenue lever up and the cost lever down, right? And that, of course, is way too simple. What managers really have are operational decisions they have to make about what products they're going to develop, what prices they're going to charge, what markets they're going to sell to, what kind of promotional strategies they're going to use, what kind of intellectual property strategy they're going to pursue, what R&D they're going to do, right? And all of those have both revenue implications and cost implications. And what's hard in making those decisions is that you have to recognize that there's always those trade-offs.
So I pick up from there on the first day as well. With the second thing that makes it hard is that we have students that come from a lot of different places. They're going to go to a lot of different places, be it sectors of the economy, be it areas of the world. And then the context in which they find themselves is going to dictate whether the strategy is going to be good or bad. And that some things are good for one firm in one particular area will bankrupt a firm in another. And so we spend a lot of time thinking about this context point. And that's important because it is both true that affects firm strategy. It also allows our students to really go to a wide variety of areas. It also allows them to be prepared for success in different global contexts, in different sectors in which we're not putting students into one particular role, but they have the ability to be very flexible throughout their entire career.
So let's talk a little bit about how we make concrete the student's ability to think through the important issues, not just sort of a generalist thing that says, well, everything's different in every different context, so the problem's hard. So tell me a little bit about what you think the key things are you do in your classroom that help students develop the ability to systematically think through the context issues that matter and come to good decisions.
I mean, one thing we do is we try and give them a series of economic frameworks that allow them to organize the information they're going to have tackling any problem. And that is one thing that I think is important to the way in which Kellogg thinks about strategy, is focusing a lot on the fundamental economics of the industry and the businesses that they are in. And then once they understand that, they can take the different inputs, the different problems that they face, and fit it into that framework. So for example, in the beginning of class, we start with the idea of fundamentally, how do you create and capture value? What does it mean to generate a product or service that people are willing to pay for? But then perhaps more fundamentally, when we think about profits, how then is the firm able to capture that value through returns they can have for the owners of the firm or for the shareholders? And that becomes a question of not just yourself as a firm in that point, in the way in which you interact with customers, but also who your competitors are, what they're doing, and it gets down to the very nature of the competitive nature of competitive strategy.
I think the other thing that's key to what we do is that learning to think differently and to think better is really an exercise that takes practice. And I think our course is really a learn by doing course. And so I think the other thing that's important about what we do is that so much of the class time is one taken up with application and discussion of applications, drawn from a whole bunch of different industries and a whole bunch of different sectors and areas of the world. And the fact that so much of what we do in class is really Socratic, rather than us talking about a framework and then showing students how to apply it and then showing them how to tie it up with a neat bow in the end, doing exactly what you said, which is starting with a framework and then sort of bouncing the example over to them and asking them prodding questions that make them do as much of the heavy lifting as possible. And doing that over and over and over again, where we're making them, in some sense, exercise and develop those thinking muscles, I think is an important part of also why students learn to think well over the course of the quarter.
Yeah, I start, when I teach in any of the programs we're in, so we both teach in our executive MBA program, we teach in our full-time and our evening and weekend MBA program. Whenever I start any of the classes, I say one of the reasons why I like to teach at Kellogg is the degree of experience that's in the room means that we can have a really rich conversation about the things that the students can bring to the table. And then I can take those experiences, fit them into the framework, and we can have a much better discussion than if it was just an hour and a half of me up there lecturing about some economic theory. There's no point in the class, and what we want when we're talking about you becoming a better thinker is you just passively taking in the material that I give you.
No, I agree. I think we're actually really lucky in the job that we have and in the course that we teach. One of the most fun things for me is as you're involved in a discussion and you are sort of trying to nudge the students toward a direction to think, and sometimes it's almost as if you can see light bulbs appear before their heads. All of a sudden you see these sort of aha expressions in their eyes, and you realize that they have come up on their own with an insight or with a conclusion that is really helping them understand what's going on. And to see over the course of the quarter, the students taking more and more charge of what's going on and contributing more and more to the direction and the real depth and kind of pushing towards those conclusions is one of the really fun things for us about teaching over the duration of the class.
And then it moves into them doing it amongst themselves, right? One student asking a question about why is this example not like the superficial example we had earlier, and then another student raising their hand and being able to explain that. That really is affirmation, I think, that they are becoming better thinkers.